I'd like to welcome you all to the Carson City Board of Equalization. It's Tuesday, January 26th at 9:10 a.m. Welcome. Can we establish the roll?
Chair Block,
Here.
Member Green Wilson, Member Rosner, Member Leonard Ray, Member Wells. A quorum's present.
Great, thank you. Okay, what are we doing here? Okay, we're gonna wing it. Let's see, notice of the public, the COVID thing, wear our masks, let's see. Members who wish, by phone, there's that. Okay, now we'll go to public, item C, public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Carson City Board of Equalization. No action may be taken on a matter raised under this item of the agenda. Is there any public comment? All right. Assessor Dolly.
Okay, how's that? Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. We don't do this too often, but there's certain times that we have people who have been on the Board of Equalization almost since the beginning of when the Board of Equalization was required by law. Roy is one of those people. Roy's been on the board forever, and he's done just a tremendous job. He's been almost on the entire time that I've been assessor, and I've been assessor for 18 years now. And so I can't tell you how much it's meant to me and the residents of Carson City, that you have spent so much time, so much dedication going through all of the appeals that we sent you, calling us, asking us questions, talking to the appellants about issues that they've had and come up with. And it truly, you have no idea how much your service has meant to us, for everything that you've done. And I know I'm stumbling quite a bit, and I apologize. But today I'd like to award this appreciation plaque to Roy for his outstanding service of the many years to the Carson City Board of Equalization. So Roy, on behalf of the Carson City Assessor's Office and the Board of Equalization, thank you for everything.
Thank you very much. I am kind of at a loss for words here, but the outstanding staff from the office and the work that you provided for us was excellent to work from, and a major help to all of us. I met some wonderful people throughout my years on the board. I liked working with Jed there. He's an excellent chairman. And the friends and the associates that I've worked with, and then your crew in the office, and I know Kim for many years, and Jill, and I just have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I appreciate this very much. And this is quite a day for me because I turned 82 today.
Oh, that's right.
So,
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So again, I thank you very much. I really
you.
appreciate this.
Thank you so much.
If nobody's going to do this, can you guys sit together, stand together for a photo op? All right.
Don't need to smile because you can't see that.
Can't smile.
I'd have to say, Roy, 16 years is an awful long time. Thank you very much for your dedication to the city of Carson. Okay, now on to item D. Oh, we're really echoing. For discussion only, Carson City Board of Equalization member orientation, Assessor Dave Dolly, Deputy District Attorney Ben Johnson, Jeff Mitchell, Department of Taxation.
Thank you, Chairman Block. Sorry, I don't know how to use these. I'm honestly just going to pass it over to Ben Johnson with the Carson City District Attorney's Office, who's going to go over the open meeting law. And then after that, we're going to listen to Jeff Mitchell, who will go into the processes as far as the County Board of Equalization, State Board, and so forth.
Good morning, Ben Johnson, Deputy District Attorney for the record. Thank you, Mr. Assessor. So I'm here to talk about the open meeting law as it applies to this board, and I'll also go over a brief overview of the ethics law that also applies to this body. I should mention that there is a YouTube video It's about 17 minutes long, so rather than play it this morning, I think I'll just hit some of the highlights. But I would encourage all members to go online. It's a video that was produced by our office, and I can forward it to everyone, or I'll give it to Kimberly and she can forward it to you all. It's a YouTube video produced by our office about open meeting law that's probably a little bit more entertaining than what I'm going to do. So I would encourage you to certainly review that, especially if you're new to the board and are not familiar with open meeting law. So the Board of Equalization is a quasi-judicial body, and not just an advisory board like most of the other boards and commissions are in the city. And what that means is that the decisions that you make here can be appealed up to the State Board of Equalization, and then they may end up in court, all the way up to the Nevada Supreme Court. So it's important that you make an accurate record when you're doing your proceedings, and this includes remembering to turn on your microphone when speaking slowly and clearly, and not talking over each other, because it's important that the clerk has a clear record if it is appealed, so that everything can be heard on the record. You're subject to the open meeting law, as I stated, and the purpose of this is transparency. The public has the right to hear your deliberations, so all decision-making must be done in the public. And it applies whenever there's a quorum present. And a quorum simply means a majority of the member of the board. So in a 5-member board, if 3 of you were to get together at Starbucks and you happen to start talking about something that could come before the board, that could be considered a meeting, and open meeting law would apply. So that's something that you want to avoid. This could include if you were at a social function, if you were all at a birthday party. However, just because you're all together in the room at the same time doesn't mean that it's a meeting. So if you were at a birthday party or a retirement or something like that, that's fine. It's just you have to remember that you can't be talking about business that can or will be coming before the board as an item. So if you're keeping it or perfectly social discussion, that's absolutely fine. It's not meant to discourage you from meeting and socializing with each other. It's just a reminder that, any deliberations or discussions that you have should be made in this room on the record. That also means that you can't deliberate or take action unless it's agendized as at a meeting, as we will have on February 9th. So, if you have an issue that you want to bring up, you really should talk to the assessor about it rather than bringing it up during a meeting, such as public comment periods. That's really not the time to be discussing items that aren't on the agenda. Another thing that you want to be aware of is what's called a walking quorum. And this is where it, again, occurs outside of a meeting, and it happens where, say, board member A talks to board member B about something that may come before the board. And then board member B talks to board member C, and they think, oh, well, that's interesting. I'm going to talk to board member D. And then pretty soon you have a majority of the board members talking about an item outside of a meeting. So even though you're not all talking at once, they call it a serial communication because it's a series of communications that together would violate the open meeting law. So that includes texting and emailing. I would encourage you not to reply all to emails that are sent by Dave or Kimberly or myself, because that kind of lends itself to, getting in those kind of discussions that we want to avoid. So, reply directly to the person rather than replying all. And then when talking with each other, again, you might have an idea, but it's best to vet everything through your board or your staff representatives rather than each other, just so that we can avoid that serial communication. So that's pretty much the highlights of the open meeting law. It's not going to apply too much today because there's really nothing on the agenda for you to discuss. And it's overall, since this board meets so rarely, you really only meet a couple times at the beginning of every year, it's not so much of a problem. But just for those meetings that you do have, just remember that any discussion or deliberation should happen in this room because the public is entitled to know your thoughts. That's the reason why you were appointed, so that we can hear your expertise and your opinions. Now, as far as the ethics rules, you are subject to NRS 281A. That is the Ethics and Government chapter. How it relates to you and your jobs here today and throughout this process, mainly is if you have a conflict of interest. And the conflict of interest is defined as having a significant pecuniary interest, meaning a monetary interest in an item, or if you have a commitment in a private capacity to another person. So if an applicant comes forward and they are a member of your family, they're a member of your household, they say it's a relative within the third degree of consanguinity. That's a fancy term of measuring how they are related to you in blood. So that would include, nieces, nephews, children, parents, grandparents, things like that. So if a member comes before, or applicant comes before the board and you know them, you should definitely let me know. Also, if you have a business relationship with somebody that's an applicant, say you own a business and you contract with them, or vice versa, or if you're a member of that business, you sit on a board. It doesn't mean that you necessarily will have to recuse yourself or abstain from voting, but definitely we should put those things on the record as a disclosure, just for the interest of transparency. So I would encourage you, if you see the agenda, once the agenda is posted and you see an item and you think, oh, well, I used to be roommates with that person, or you have some kind of connection, please contact me. We can discuss it and I can help you write a disclosure statement that would be read into the record at the time that item is heard. And I can help you figure out whether or not you need to abstain from voting on that particular item. The law only requires abstention when it's a very clear case of a conflict of interest. So it might be something that, it's not quite clear whether or not it is in fact a conflict, and I can help you work that out, but I need to know beforehand. I really don't like being surprised. I don't think any attorney does. Right before the meeting starts and one of you comes up and says, oh, I think I have a conflict, help me. I certainly will help you, but it's better to do it beforehand just so that we're not rushing and making a mistake that may violate that ethics law. So that's essentially a quick and dirty overview of open meeting law and ethics. As I mentioned, that there is a YouTube video on the DA's website, and we can send that out to you, that will go over some of the other open meeting law aspects that apply, but that's really, I think, what you need to know to do your jobs. And certainly I'm available for questions right now if anyone has any. No? Okay. Well, I look forward to working with you, and if you do have any questions as we go along in this process, feel free to reach out to me or to the assessor or his staff. Thank you.
Now I'm on. I'm comfortable either removing or leaving on. I believe we're 6 feet of distance, but if it's easier to understand me. Yeah, all right. We are distanced, but I find when communicating, it's a little easier to read my lips. And when I crack jokes and smile to make sure I'm actually cracking a joke. Thank you, Chair and members of the board, for inviting me here. My name is Jeff Mitchell. I'm a Deputy Director at the Department of Taxation and have been there about 8 years. Terry Rubald was the deputy who used to come and provide information and orientation for a long time, and she was a fantastic deputy, and I got to work with her for a while. And so I'll refer to the chair if this is acceptable, but my presentation style, I prefer interruptions. I prefer questions. I think it helps the conversation goes. So if you have something as I'm mid-sentence, please don't hesitate. I look forward to that. That's easier for me. I think it helps the conversation flow and help things go. So please interrupt me. That's about as good as it gets from me. I have 2 computers because one has my cheat sheets and my notes on it. So again, I apologize, and I'll just delve right in. Some of the reference materials that I'll be talking about is every year the Department of Taxation prepares and emails out County Board of Equalization hearing guidelines. And that kind of goes over the format of the county board, recommended appeal forms that you can put out on the web, recommended decision letters, the format that those follow, and things along those lines. We also produce a book called The Property Tax Elements and Applications. And that's a publication that's required by law that the Department of Taxation publishes each year that pretty much summarizes Nevada's property tax system. Nevada's property tax system is complex. And so that manual, unfortunately, is a solid 80 pages. But it covers all the different assessment roles, different boards and commissions that oversee property tax, and all the different elements. And that's available on our website, and it's also available to give to any of you as you wish. And then I'll cover open meeting law a little bit. Your attorney, DA, did a wonderful job, and thank you for covering that. So we can skip over those slides. And again, Chair, if we're going over something that you don't think is relevant, just give me the rolling finger. I have very thick skin, and I have no problem speeding through slides as we are moving along. So a couple of important dates to go over in regards to the County Board of Equalization. The 2021 and 2022 secured roll appeals need to be received by 5 p.m., either postmarked USPS or electronic by January 15th. The 2020-2021 unsecured roll appeals of values placed on the roll between May 1st and December 15th also need to be received by that timeline. And ag land conversion appeals that occur between July and December 16th need to be received by 5 p.m. The unsecured roll, sometimes referred to as the personal property roll or where businesses' property is placed on, that is open during the time that the County Board of Equalization meets. It actually opens May 1st and closes April 30th. And so any values that are placed on before December 16th come before you first. But if they're placed on after that date, it is a direct appeal to the State Board of Equalization. And then the last day of February is when all business needs to be concluded by the County Board of Equalization. And that's actually an important date for budgetary reasons. We hound the assessor's office for different reports, and I wish we didn't hound them as much as we do. But one of the reports is referred to as the segregation report, where they have to outline and segregate the different roles and the values that have been placed on those roles. And the first one is due February 1st or January 30th at the end of the year. And then there's a revised one due March 5th. And that revised one, March 5th, actually encompasses the changes that occur during the County Board of Equalization. Those two reports are used by the Department of Taxation to develop budget revenue forecasts. And so we turn those budget revenue forecasts back to the County Board of Commissioners to help them develop their budgets, and the county school districts, all the different local government entities use those revenue projections to produce their budgets and kick that back to us. And so if business isn't concluded by then everything kind of chunks along. So that's just the reason for those dates. One of the reasons there. The State Board of Equalization, that is under the direction of the Department of Taxation. There's actually 5 different boards and commissions that the Department of Taxation works with, and we provide staff for. And so the State Board of Equalization begins on the 4th Monday in March. The different appeals that come before the State Board of Equalization. When you're looking at values within the county, there's values referred to as locally assessed, and then there's values referred to as centrally assessed. And centrally assessed property, those are usually companies or property that cross state or county lines. An example would be NV Energy or Southwest Airlines or Delta, a gas line, Southwest Gas, things along those lines. It would be very difficult to do an asset allocation by county for each one of those companies, especially if it came to an appeal. They would have to appeal within that 1-month timeline to all 17 different counties. And so those are assessed at the state level, and then the values transmitted and placed on the centrally assessed roll, and we collect the taxes and distribute those out to the counties where that property is located. But those values are appealed to the state board. The state board also hears appeals from the county board of equalization. So if a taxpayer or a petitioner brings an appeal to you and you rule on it, those appeals can be carried to the next level to the state board of equalization.
So those appeals need to be filed by March 10th of each month, or March 10th if after our ruling. So the appellants, if they want to appeal the county's decision, they have to do it by March 10th of 2021 for this year.
Yes.
And so a lot of what the other stuff is that you were talking about, NV Energy and Southwest Airlines, that all just goes directly to the state board, and we don't have to consider that unless they are residing in Carson City.
Correct.
As far as a base operation.
Yep.
Okay.
And so those locally assessed, as mentioned, come to you first, and then they are appealed to the state board by March 10th. Now, the March 10th is within statute. There's been I don't want to say it's a legally gray area, but there's been some contention on that in regards to decision letters that are issued. And there's a little flexibility, and where this comes from is actually State Board of Equalization regulations and guidelines. We have to issue a decision letter at the state board, so once the state board reaches a decision, within 60 days.
So that's really not anything that we need to be concerned with other than the date of letting them know that they can appeal.
Let them know, March 10th, if they appeal by then, they're set.
Okay,
If they don't receive a decision letter, there has been precedent set that once they receive that decision letter, they have 30 days to appeal.
let's keep rolling for what we're doing.
Yes, keep rolling. And thank you. I get off on tangents here that may not apply, but I want to paint a big picture, so rein me in. But yes, and that's an important note for the clerk, that those decision letters need to go out fairly timely, because there can be a countdown of 30 days from the county board from when they receive that decision letter. We'll go on to the next one. The appeal forms that we send out, this is just an overview. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but it kind of gives the different parts of the appeal forms and what's included therein. If there's no questions, we'll just move on to the next section. And, well, I'll talk about this a little bit. The part A, B, and C of the appeal forms deal with the owner of the property. And that became an interesting,
So the appeal forms and everything, that's something that they would contact the assessor's office and they would go through all that stuff and make sure that the property owners, the identification, all that stuff, the county assessor would already have that ready for our board here.
correct. That
Okay.
is something that the clerk of the board handles and take cares of, as well as the appeal deadlines. And so the appeal deadlines, if they received it after that January 15th, technically they still should bring that forward to you, but you should not accept jurisdiction over those appeals. And so that then there's a clear record that flows from that. But they also go through this and make sure that the appellant fills out and has the owner and all that in there.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question real quick? Mr. Mitchell, real quick. So if there's an appeal on an exemption, whether a property is exempt or not, do we still include the valuation for how the determination or how the properties were valued?
Yes, it is best to have that complete record, to have that valuation on there, just because there could be partial exemptions that come into play on the valuation. It is not a necessary requirement for the appeal to proceed forward, but I believe that it helps encompass and show all the characteristics
great.
of the property.
Thank you.
So this goes back to 2012 and 2016. There were a growing number of cases that were not getting a hearing on the merits evaluation because the county board did not take jurisdiction to hear the case. And this had to do with who was filing the appeals. So various tax representatives went to the 2015 legislature and the law was changed. This was Assembly Bill 452, and it did three major things. It redefined who an owner is, it defined who can sign an agent authorization, and it allowed a taxpayer a longer time to cure an objection to the authorization. So the assessors are used to dealing with the legal owner or his representative, but under the current law that changed in 2015, any person who controls or possesses the property can also appeal. That includes not only the partners, trustees, and possessory interest owners, but also lessees and management companies. Therefore, the appeal form now
So,
includes.
Jeff, what you're saying, it's not just beneficial ownership, but it's somebody that might be hired to control or operate or anything like that? Okay.
Yes. And that's where the agent authorization also comes into play. That needs to be looked at and signed to make sure that they qualify under one of those and actually have an interest in the property and able to appeal. If there is an objection to that appeal, I'll scroll down. So the written authorization form may be signed by the owner or person employed by the owner. And so it flows back to that person still.
So as far as we're concerned on the County Board of Equalization, these are the things that the assessor's office needs to make sure that they know who the beneficial ownership is or who the petitioner is or who has power of attorney and all that stuff. So we're not really concerned with that by the time it gets to the appeal and the assessor's office and it comes to us. All those boxes have been checked and all the I's dotted and T's crossed.
And I'm not sure if it would be the assessor or the clerk of the board who would be testifying and getting those facts in. So if an appeal is filled out and not all of those check boxes are marked, the appeal should still come forward and be heard.
As long as they put the appeal in by the day of deadline. So then that extreme circumstance would be the only time that we would really have to determine anything on the board if it wasn't filled out properly. But the county clerk and the assessor's office would have probably already gone through those protocols.
They should have you through those protocols. And if the appeal comes forward and these protocols aren't met, they should make that aware to you. And again, the motion would be not to take jurisdiction over this appeal.
Okay.
And so it would still need to be agendized and heard for them.
And by that time, it would probably be on the agenda and the assessor, he's been really good at this for years, would have already notified us about that stuff.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so a lot of this stuff has to do more with, obviously, we have jurisdiction over it as the county board, but everything that this is in statute and everything else is something that the assessor's office has to abide by and do their due diligence before it even comes to us.
Yes. So when it comes to you, it should be agendized if you're dealing with a valuation issue and looking at that, or if this is a jurisdictional issue. And all these things are jurisdictional issues that should be worked on. And
A lot of this is what you're talking about. Really, our board here doesn't need to be really concerned about it. We need to be aware of it. But what are the things through all this stuff that we're talking about that the board should really be aware of? You know, I know beneficial ownership. We've all been in different trades and professions over here for our expertise. But with all this stuff, I'm kind of trying to weed through because it's a lot of what's on your PowerPoint and everything is a great reference that we can go to. But is there any way that you could go through and pick through the most important thing for the county board?
yes, absolutely. And this is from my perspective. I'm not quite sure how many appeals you have this year. 50? Five. You're probably not going to have appeals that deal in this matter. I know that Clark County is looking at well over 1,000 appeals this year, and a lot of them are going to be dealing on this jurisdictional matter. So something to have in your head and reference if something comes forward along these lines, but we can skip forward, absolutely. I won't concede that it's unimportant, though. And I know you weren't. I apologize. No, so you're correct. A lot of the front part of my presentation had to do with the authorization jurisdictional issues. Most of the appeals that you're going to be looking at have to deal with the valuation of the property.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
real quick, I'm going back to the beginning of your PowerPoint. You mentioned that we can receive an electronic appeal form.
Mhm.
Years ago, we used to be required to still receive the original signatures in hand. Is that still the case? Or if we've received the completed application, all the dots are dotted, Ts are crossed, is that still acceptable?
An electronic signature would need to accompany the form, but an electronic signature is acceptable.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Let's see. So powers of the county board. These are governed by NRS 361.345. The county board may determine the valuation of any real or personal property placed on the secured or unsecured tax rolls by the county assessor. And the county board may change and correct any valuation found to be incorrect unless the owner has refused the assessor access to the property. And so those are very important points that I kind of want to go over. Let's, the different exceptions to the authority, as we mentioned, property on the secured roll not assessed by the county assessor. This is NV Energy, Southwest, and property on the unsecured roll that falls out of that deadline. So there's mainly three types of appeals. There's overvalued, property similarly situated. So, and they mark this on the appeals. So basically the two first ones are dealing with equitability. Am I being valued in the same manner and in a consistent manner with similarly typed properties? And the third, which is the more common form of appeals that come forward, is full cash value of property is less than taxable value. So taxable value established by the assessor is done in two manners. They look at the full cash or the highest and best use of the land, and then the improvements are valued by replacement cost new less statutory depreciation. And those two values are brought together to come up with the taxable value. If that value that is arrived exceeds full cash value, and full cash value is what the property would sell for on an open and fair market, all parties knowing what they're doing. So if that value is higher than the full cash, it should never be that. And so that is something that the board often considers. And so next slide just talks about what we just talked about, what the full cash is, and that's the probable price. That's the sales price if it's an open fair market sale. So when dealing with appeals that have to do with equitability, there's a couple of different tools available to the county assessors as well as to the County Board of Equalization when those are brought forward. One of the main points of equalization that we look at is the ratio study. This is a study performed by the state, not the state board, by the Department of Taxation. And this is an overall look at the county. We do this once every 3 years where we come in and we value properties and we compare our values to the values that the assessors are doing. And we do samples across residential, commercial, vacant land. and develop statistics to see if on an overall level, we believe that there is equalization within the county. And that is presented to the tax commission. The tax commission can take an equalization measure, but if an appeal is brought forward on an equalization, this is a tool to use to help come to that determination, as well as the evidence that may be brought forward by the appellant. The last ratio study that we had was the 2021. As you know, the assessed value is 35% of taxable value. Within statute, we're given a range. The assessor can fall between 0.32 and 0.36 of taxable value there. And so the ratio study that we did went through and looked at different classes of property and did a median ratio. And in our opinion, Carson City has done very well. We have found no instances of broad unequalization. That is not to say, and if an appeal comes forward or something is within a subdivision or something along that lines, there obviously evidence can be received, but from the Department of Taxation's perspective, Carson City is doing very well in regards to equalization. So when you get to the actual hearing, as mentioned by the district attorney, it's important to create a record because the record is what is presented forward if the appeal continues on to the State Board of Equalization or up to District Court, Supreme Court, and onwards. And so it's important to identify the different parties, who the petitioner is, who the respondent is, and if there's any interveners. Interveners tend to be more on the State Board of Equalization level. That tends to be if there's an appeal of a centrally assessed property. The county has a financial interest, whether those taxes are raised or lows, or that value is raised or lows, and the corresponding taxes. So they can intervene and be party to all the different evidence that is presented, that is there. So it's important to identify who is appearing on behalf of the petitioner. And that can be handled at the beginning of each hearing by the chair. Usually, petitioner, could you please identify yourself and establish your relation to the property? The identification of the property itself is usually done by the county assessor to orientate you to the type of property that we are dealing with and looking at. Is this a residential property in the southwest corner of Carson City, 1970s home, ranch style, things along that lines to give you an overall idea. Yes.
Is there any value given, particularly in a place like Carson City, for historical value? That's intrinsic to, say, you're comparing and a property has had a lot of rehabilitation to keep it in prime condition, or, that kind of thing.
With the improvements on the property, the assessor is constrained by certain regards. They are required to value it as new, so as if that property was built today, less 1.5% depreciation for 50 years. So very historical properties that haven't been heavily renovated, they are going to have 75% depreciation on the improvements. Now, the land value there is going to be valued as it is being used. So if it's being used as a commercial property or a residential property, things along those lines. Now, if a property has been renovated extensively, such that a building permit has been issued and wiring, that can all change and affect the effective age of a property. And so the assessor does take all of those considerations in when doing their initial valuation of various properties out there. So if you have an old home that was an old block house that has been entirely gutted and is basically functioning as a new home on the inside, that appropriate depreciation would be part of the record card, part of the record that the assessor would bring forward, and so you'd be able to see how they have addressed that depreciation. And if I'm not speaking correctly, yell at me.
Jeff, on a lot of times with historic properties, if you're renovating and stuff, you're not changing the real property, you're not changing the square footage, you're not changing the use, you're not changing that. You can apply for a historic tax deferment that's offered by the National Park Service, and that goes to the Historic Resources Commission that makes a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. So because your house is old doesn't mean that it's falling off the tax rolls, but there is economic depreciation and things like that go into effect. But the main thing with the house would be a historic tax deferment. And that wouldn't be, we're looking at light properties in that area, so we're fine with that.
Yeah. So what do you do if no one shows up? They file an appeal and they don't move forward. There are regulations that help provide guidance on that. It is regulations for the State Board of Equalization. Unfortunately, there are not regulations that govern the County Board of Equalization. And so that would be a good question to defer to your district attorney on whether you wish to apply the State Board's regulations and that they seem fair and reasonable in regards to the County Board. So on the State Board level, there's 3 different options. We can proceed with the hearing, and with that, there's evidence that's been provided.
Jeff, on the county board, if nobody shows up, we can proceed with the hearing. The assessor is going to present that, and we're going to look at it based on our jurisdiction here on whether it is in equalization or not within equalization. Or we can dismiss it and it automatically goes to the State Board of Equalization where they apply all these, if they appeal by the 15th of March.
Yeah, if you deny it, they still have that appeal right to appeal to us by March 10th. But it does not automatically flow up on the appeal level. Or you can have the choice to recess to a later date within that month to give them another chance to appear. So again, just procedural during the county boards need to identify the property. If a person is acting as an appraiser of a property, that's an issue, especially when it comes to tax representatives. A person should not perform the duties of property tax appraiser unless he or she holds a valid appraiser certificate issued by the department. And so if they're construing themselves as a property appraiser or a property tax appraiser, especially tax representatives, owners can come to their conclusion of values of their own property. But that evidence needs to be given with a grain of salt, that it is technically breaking the law for them to propose to be an appraiser. That probably is not going to come into too much effect here, but it has been a large issue within Clark County with tax representatives. So I share that with everyone. So due process requirements, adherence to open meeting law, proper notice, clear and complete agenda, and notice of action. All that, again, should be handled by the clerk, and it's not wrong for the chair or for the assessor to make notice and to point out those things to establish a clear record as to moving forward. One thing in regard to open meeting law, I would be very cautious about your cell phones, especially during the meeting. These can and often are contested cases, and if they see you texting, and if somebody else happens to get a text, avoid that. Please don't answer your cell phone, and please don't text another board member. Any and all debate about a property should be open and should be delivered during the course of the hearing there. I'll skip over some of the open meeting law highlights.
And just so the rest of the board knows, we always have a member of the district attorney's office here to keep us on the straight and narrow. So if we have any questions during the meeting, what we can or can't do, then we'll be answering them.
And maybe now's a good time to just pause, see if there's any general questions before I get into a little bit more of my presentation here and what the goal of the county board is, what things you should consider, and what things we're looking at. All right. So at the end of the hearing, again, this is just a procedural, the notice of the action, the decision letter. It is the duty to notify petitioners of the county board action, as well as any other property owner whose property values were affected. And we do that with a notice of decision letter. This isn't a common case, but with the equalization, let's say you had a case come before you and you noticed that there seemed to be an equalization issue within a subdivision, that houses were not being valued consistently, that there was a wide variation, and you determined that there needed to be action taken within that whole subdivision. You cannot raise those values, but if there's an issue of overvaluation, you are allowed to lower all those values within a specified area based upon the evidence. If you do that, those property owners that are having their values lowered by the county board, they never appealed. They never had notice of the meeting because they weren't necessarily party to that. But an action was taken that affected their values. And so that decision letter, again, is very important for them to receive, because not in all cases would people even want their values lowered. And so they need to be notified of that action so that they can have the chance to appeal that onwards if they wish to. And so that brings up an interesting point, that values can be affected of properties that haven't been appealed through your action. That should only be the case when it's dealing with equalization issues. And if it's an equalization issue, it would be notified as such on the agenda.
And let go and it'll turn green. You don't have to hold it. And then. There you go, you're green, don't touch it.
Does this apply also to new properties? We're having a lot of building now that we haven't had in recent years. If, let's say, the builder decides that they're going to add $20,000 for each phase or something like that, does the taxation come into play only once they're sold? They can do anything that they want before that? Or?
So when we're dealing with vacant land, the assessor is going to be valuing it at full cash value, what it's selling for as of a specific date. And so they're looking at different valuation methodologies to determine what that property would have sold for. And so appeals that you're looking on that are coming forward to you, that valuation has been established. So you'd be looking at different evidence of what that valuation might be. Am I understanding the question correctly there?
It seems like
Where's the IT guy?
Hold it in just for a few seconds, and then it should.
Let go, let go. There you go.
it just seems like it's such a particularly if a property is, say, hot, and there are a lot of people that are coming, and the builder says, oh, I can make another 50 grand on each of these, or whatever it is. Is it in anticipation of beginning that sale at the beginning of the development that the values are established, and then later on?
Can I step in and answer this question real quick? So what happens is there's three methodologies that we use for determining property taxes or property tax valuations. The first one's going to be your cost approach. We use a company called Marshall & Swift. It's a national estimator program that we're required to use through Nevada code, administrative code. So if a property developer can get $20,000 more for their property, that's a market value, and we don't value that way. We value it based on replacement cost. There are certain months and certain quarters that we have to use. So residential, I believe, is December of the year prior to what the lien date is. So our lien date is July 1st. So we would be, like, for instance, this year, it was July 1st, 2020. So that's when we're determining what the values are going to be. So we would use the Marshall & Swift from December of 2019 to determine what the valuation is. Again, it's a cost. It's not going to be based on the market value. So all of so that we can be consistent for all properties in the city, we have to use that valuation model. You put in the square footage, you put in how it's built, whether it's brick, mason, or hardboard siding, it's got metal siding or what have you, what type of roof, how many fixtures, how many bathrooms, and so forth. That's all standardized, and that's how we're going to come up with that amount. The first, and we do this with every property, is a replacement cost. We recost all structures on an annual basis. Then if somebody does come into us and talks to us about they believe their value is over market value, we then can do a comparable. We'll use comparable sales. We'll look to see what has sold that's been similar to that particular property. If it's an income-producing property, we can actually do an income approach to value to determine whether, based on their income, the property value is too high for the market. But yeah, we don't really look at the market value. That's not what the law says we have to be under market for all values, and that's what we try to do. But the first and foremost is going to be replacement costs, period. Okay.
So what is the purpose of the County Board of Equalization hearing? You have an appeal brought forward in front of you dealing with the valuation of the property. If it's coming forward, I've found that the assessors are really good at that. If evidence is provided to them that they're exceeding full cash value, they tend to make those adjustments. And so if an appeal is coming forward, there is a disagreement on the evidence and on the valuation. And so the appeal or the hearing is to construct a model of real-world events on which a decision can be made. And evidence is what supplies the backbone on that. So the different evidence that can come forward, witnesses, documents, pretty much anything that's presented at the hearing. It's a little bit at the chair's discretion, but I would recommend giving the petitioner leeway on presenting whatever evidence they wish to bring forward and make part of the record. And that way you have a full consideration of what's in front of you. Your job and your goal, you should exclude evidence that's a little bit irrelevant. If they're talking about what's going on in Missouri or Clark, that's not necessarily relevant to what's going on in Carson City. If they tend to be a little bit repetitious, if they're presenting the same cell over and over again, it's fine to remind them that we've heard that evidence, it's part of the record, it'll be considered. You can march them along a little bit to make sure that you have a complete record, but they also don't need to rehash a point, sometimes like I do, 3 or 4 times. It is presented, and there it is. And then you should weigh the evidence admitted. When you're considering a case, there's different levels on which that case can be considered. The burden of proof for a taxpayer is, burden of proof for the case is originally on the taxpayer. The assessor's value is considered correct unless proven wrong by the evidence. And so the taxpayer needs to provide that evidence that exceeds that burden of proof. So how do they do that? And we have a couple of different standards that are out there. The amount of evidence necessary for a party to prevail in a case has 3 different levels: a preponderance, clear and convincing, and beyond a reasonable doubt. In the civil trials and criminal trials, you often hear the beyond a reasonable doubt. This isn't to that level. As a quasi-judicial board, you do not have to have evidence to a beyond a reasonable doubt. At the State Board of Equalization, there was a recent Supreme Court case that said we had to have clear and convincing evidence at the State Board. At the County Board, it is a preponderance. A preponderance as evidence is more than 50%. 51%. You are slightly convinced that the evidence that's been presented before you is of the level that the valuation is wrong or exceeds full cash value there. So I'm skipping through these slides because I just summarized it. So again, the burden of proof that I talked about is clear and satisfactory, and that's an NRS, but this is a State Board of Equalization statute. So clear and satisfactory on the State Board level, a fundamentally wrong principle was applied. The board refused to exercise its best judgment, or the assessment was so excessive it gives rise to an implication of fraud or bad faith. So those are the evidence levels at the State Board. So when those,
And once again, we have Ben, which will keep us in line with all this stuff. So we
Yes.
don't need to be really concerned with, he will let us know if we're overstepping our bounds or going in a direction that we shouldn't be.
so as mentioned, the assessor's valuation is presumed valid, accurate, and correct until overturned by credible evidence. So what information do you need to determine change or correct value? First, did the assessor follow the requirements of law? Was taxable value established appropriately? That's governed by NRS 361.227. Mr. Dolly went into some detail on the establishment of value for improved property. He also, during the course of a hearing, should go into how the value is established if it's vacant land or commercial property. And I found through the appeals that have come forward to the State Board, he does a very good job of laying out how the value was established. And so one of the things for you to consider is how was that established according to law? So was Marshall and Swift costing service used correctly? And was the land value valued using comparable cells? So after the assessor has established that he has established the value according to law, and if you're in agreement with that and have waived the evidence, one of the consideration is that computed taxable value that the assessor came up with, did it exceed full cash value? Oftentimes, this is where evidence will be presented of different sales in the neighborhood. They'll say, my taxable value is $350. And look, all the homes selling in here are only selling at 300,000. I'm exceeding a reasonable value by $50,000. That would be evidence that could be considered, and I would consider it. So if you determine that full cash value or taxable value exceeds full cash value, you can apply obsolescence to the property, or you can reduce the value of that property. There are different routes to reducing the value of that property that the county board can consider. So the first is a reduction to the improvements of the property. If you feel the land value is consistent and you want to bring a $350,000 house down to $300,000 based on comparable sales, the first reduction would probably be to the improvements of the property. If you don't feel that it's appropriate, you can have obsolescence. Well, you can have a reduction in value to the land. And the last fallback on large commercial properties, you can actually have a reduction to the personal property or the business property of that value to bring it down within that range so that it doesn't exceed full cash value. And that's a discussion to have as you're considering the merits of the case, and you want to have that on the open record. I feel that the improvements should be reduced by X number, or based upon the comparisons of the income approach, I don't think that this income producing property has the value established by the assessor, that the improvements should be lowered by such and such. Again, this slide is just talking about what I just talked about. So, again, examine the taxable value. If you feel it's a land value issue, an improvement value issue, make that part of the record in making your decision. And that way the decision letter can go out and a proper record is established if it wishes to be further appealed. These are different exceptions to property and the valuations established by the assessor. So this is more training for the clerk on the exhibits. When the exhibits are brought forward to you, they should be marked in a manner that's readily available, so that you can say, please refer to CB page number 3, and everybody is on the same page and looking at the same exhibit when you're going through. Those files and that record, if it is appealed to the next level, the only thing that the state board should initially consider is the record established by the county board. And so we will have minutes of your different testimony. And that's invaluable to see what the thought process of the county board and how they determine different things that they went through, if they determine that there wasn't enough evidence. Because the duty of the state board is when a case, they either uphold the county board's decision or they overturn it. And if that record isn't clear, if that testimony isn't kicked forward, please do so. I don't know. Anything else you want me to cover? Questions?
There it goes. No, I think you covered it all. And being on this board for a number of years, I'm really impressed at how much research and discovery and everything that the assessor's office does. They all work very hard, and they give us the options of what we can do. They don't direct us on what we need to do or anything like that. And between the assessor's evidence and all the detail that they've gone to, and with the district attorney here, we've, on this board, we've got some really good guidance. And so, great presentation.
My only wish, I wish I would have brought a case forward so I could show you kind of how it's structured, but I didn't.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just throw a couple things in there real quick. Mr. Mitchell, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to make the presentation today. One of the things that you will be hearing in one of the cases is that they don't believe that their taxes, they're paying too much in their taxes. The most important thing that I have to say is we don't deal with taxes. Our board is determining property values, the taxable value and the assessed value. And the assessed value is 35% of the taxable value. But we are strictly concerned with the taxable values of the property, making sure that the taxable values are not over market value. So if you hear an appellant talking about their taxes being too high or it's going to raise their taxes too much, that's not our concern. We do in the packet, when you see the packet, I mean, we've had a couple cases where you have a 3-ring binder and that packet is full with our exhibits. And then we get thrown a lot of times their exhibits when we get to the board itself. So you're going to have to look at all that stuff. But in our packet in prior years, the previous boards have asked for information regarding the property tax cap. Because in 2005, the Nevada legislature did put a property tax cap into place, which states that all single-family owner occupied properties, the actual tax amount can only go up 3% each year. For all other properties, commercial, industrial, vacant land, or income-producing properties, that cap is 8% each year, or up to 8%. It's only been 8% in Carson City 1 year, and that was all the way back in 2006. So we do put that in there. We don't have a problem taking it out if you guys don't want it, but we've always felt that that's what was asked of us before, and that's what we do. We will be providing those. We try to get the packets out. Well, we make the statutorial deadline, obviously, but we try to get them out early. We will email them to you if you request them emailed. We can also print them out for you and deliver them. At this time, I'd kind of like to introduce my staff that you'll be dealing with because they're the ones who are my delivery people. So sitting at the table right there is Jeremy Sapoznik. He's been in my office the longest. He was actually a fee appraiser prior to coming to the assessor's office. Very knowledgeable and very detail oriented. So he's a good one. In the back in the mask, not Roy, but the other mask, is Bryce. He's actually our newest appraiser that just came to the office. He actually comes from a commercial brokerage background. And so he's going to be working a lot on the income approach to properties or commercial values and so forth. Next to him is Travis Haslam. Travis is relatively new to the appraisal field, but doing an outstanding job and working very well with the taxpayers. And so if you have any questions or if when you get your books, one of these three, well, we'll be doing it. But this lady right here, Kimberly Adams, she's my chief deputy. She's been in the office for over 20 years. She pretty much runs the show. If you have questions, you can ask her. She knows everything about it. I'm in the office all the time too, so but she knows more than I do. So please give Kim a call, and she can help you out. So we're here for you. If you have any questions, just give us a call.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Assessor. Does anybody have any other questions? How about if we move on to item E for possible action discussion to the date of the next scheduled meeting? Mr. Assessor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as stated before, we have 5 appeals. We're working on, we believe 2 of them are going to withdraw. We have a stipulation for 1 of them. We have an exemption that we need to deal with next time. We would like to actually hear all of them on February 9th. So there will not be a meeting next Tuesday on February 2nd, but we're hoping to get them all completed by February 9th, if that's okay with you.
It's okay with me.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Now on to item F, public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on any matter that is not specific. See, Jeff, that feedback happens to me when I talk too much. Included on the agenda as an action item, no action may be taken on a matter raised under this agenda. For public comment, I think that, I just realized seeing Roy sit back there for 16 years, My dad was on the County Board of Equalization approximately 50 years ago. Kind of interesting, but for me anyway.
Do you want, can I make just a comment? It's just weird. It's just off the cuff. I just found out, my dad just passed away in June last year, and I was going through all of his stuff. And my grandfather was a member of the California Board of Equalization in Sacramento in the 50s. And I had no idea. I had no clue. So it was really cool to find out that it's kind of progressing in the family here.
It's interesting what they never tell us. Jeremy, do you have a? No. Okay. And once again, I'd like to thank Roy for your 16 years of service. I mean, just extraordinary. He's been working in this community for many years, not only on this, but with the sheriff's office and various other things. I mean, he's been a great citizen of the city of Carson. Is there any other public comment? I would like to go to item G for possible action on the adjournment. Do I have a motion?
I move to adjourn this meeting.
A motion. We have a motion. Do I hear a second?
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. We'll see you back on the February 9th. Thank you.